about 250,000 Americans have a diagnosable mental illness. And through surveys we've run, we've seen about 78% of Americans have experienced serious mental health challenges over the past year, and only about half are even thinking about getting treatment and talking about it and pursuing it.
Welcome back to the Fitt Insider Podcast. I'm your host, Joe Veneri. Today I'm joined by Dylan Beynon, founder and CEO of Mindbloom. In this episode, we talk about the mental health crisis, including the shortcomings of existing treatment options. Dylan explains the company's approach to delivering at-home psychedelic therapy, plus he shares future plans to expand beyond ketamine as drugs like psilocybin become legal. Let's get into it. The Fitt Insider Podcast is brought to you by Jack Taylor, our exclusive PR partner. More than just PR, they're creative storytellers and brand builders who actually understand the health and wellness industry. To learn more, head to fitt.co/JackTaylor. That's fitt.co/JackTaylor. Hi, Dylan. Welcome to Fitt Insider. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, Joe. Psyched to jam today.
Yeah, man. I think a lot of interesting things to talk about, a lot of different aspects of mental health, psychedelics, telemedicine, and potentially even more than that. But to kick things off, maybe could you just introduce yourself and tell us about Mindbloom?
I'm Dylan Beynon. I'm the founder and CEO of Mindbloom. Mindbloom is the largest provider of psychedelic therapy in the United States today. We provide at-home ketamine therapy for people with anxiety or depression. We have done two big things in Mindbloom. One is that we have dramatically increased access to ketamine psychedelic therapy through a telemedicine platform that's brought the cost of treatment down 80% from when I started the company in 2018. Got it available to hundreds of millions of Americans in terms of access that didn't have access previously. We're in 38 states, reaching 85% of the population, and really tore down a lot of barriers to access around the stigma and patient education. And then the second big thing we've done is create a sort of complete solution with content, coaching, a community, all wrapped in a mobile app that's like Calm, but for psychedelic therapy, to help people get the best clinical outcomes that have ever existed, not just in ketamine, but in all of depression and anxiety against legacy treatments like SSRIs and talk therapy, which we actually published last year in the largest ever peer-reviewed clinical study in 70 years of psychedelic therapy and 20 years of ketamine therapy history.
Yeah, a lot to talk about there, from increasing access, bringing down costs, the research that you're doing into kind of proving out and validating this therapy, and also even the kind of at-home aspect. But one of the things that, and I mentioned this to you, previously used Mindbloom, went through the 6-week session, had the experience obviously with the clinicians and coaches. But for someone who's not familiar, when you say we're increasing access and we're doing this as an at-home treatment, I think there's an initial kind of skepticism, like, wait, you're going to just mail me this drug and I'm going to do it and have this kind of self-guided session? Maybe what, in terms of, again, someone who's not familiar, what does that experience look like from the time that I reach out, sign up on the website, to actually get the ketamine delivered to the house?
So when you look at mental health treatments, what most people really think about are antidepressants and anti-anxiety meds. So for people with depression, these are SSRIs like Lexapro. And for anxiety, these are usually benzodiazepines like Xanax. And when people think about these medications, they often think of a daily pill that you take every single day while you're going through treatment until possibly you don't have anxiety or depression. Although if you look at the clinical outcomes, that actually doesn't happen that frequently when people take them, which we can talk more about. Ketamine therapy, and specifically Mindbloom's ketamine therapy program, looks a lot different. So it's a 6-session treatment program where people are taking each dose generally about 1 week apart. And throughout that time period, each dose is helping people enter a state of neuroplasticity. This is where the brain is more easily able to create new connections between brain cells to rewire the brain in healthier ways with healthier neural pathways, which then show up in terms of healthier emotional patterns and behavioral patterns. There are studies that show, there's a big study just published in Nature, that psychedelics, including ketamine, open what's called the critical period in the brain. And so when you're a child or an adolescent, you have this massive critical period where you're able to be a sponge and wire your brain and learn. Sometimes when you go through other experiences, it can be like high intensity interval training. There's some studies that maybe show sauna can do this as well, can create these short-lived states of neuroplasticity. For ketamine specifically, it opens up this critical period for neuroplasticity for about a week. And so throughout this 6-session program, where people are working with a psychiatrist or psychiatric clinician on their behavioral health, a specialized coach that we call a guide through both one-on-one and group therapy settings, people are stacking these 1-week neuroplastic windows to achieve really transformational changes in their mental health. One of the most common things that we hear from our clients, and we've done about 300,000 sessions over the past 4 years since launching, is that it feels for people like they're getting years and years of therapy in just a few sessions.
Yeah, I think it's pretty incredible the impact from, the first session, that first experience, to the 6 weeks. It does, as you were saying, it stacks and builds on the other one, because these pathways are opening and staying open, and you're making these connections well beyond the time that the kind of medication, which lasts about 45 minutes, it's really fast acting, and then, kind of back to reality. But days and weeks later, taking a walk, sitting down, journaling, like, you seemingly have these connections that, I don't know, they weren't previously there. I don't know, obviously know the science of it, but I can just speak to like the feeling of like mini aha moments, or just like this different program running in the background that is pretty transformative. When it comes to thinking about previously doing something like ketamine at a clinic, right? So you're going in, you're booking what I would imagine is 90 minutes, 2 hours to sit there and do this experience, seemingly having somebody go with you to be able to drive you there. You're probably not going to be driving yourself. And then shifting into the home. You mentioned, starting the company in 2018. At that time, yes, there are obviously some clinics that are emerging and starting to gain traction, but this is all fairly new. And especially the idea of, hey, how are telemedicine laws going to change such that we're going to be able to deliver it at the home, in home. So at the time of thinking, hey, this is the company kind of looking ahead a little bit in terms of what you want it to be, what was the initial maybe reception or pushback that you got, both from, whether it was investors, whether it was from consumers, the broader market, and then how were you able to kind of navigate that now to, as you said, 300,000 plus treatments?
When I started Mindbloom in late 2018, I knew from day one that we wanted to drive towards building a telemedicine offering for ketamine therapy to both increase access, but also, as you pointed out, to actually deliver superior client experiences and outcomes by allowing people to do it at home and providing a lot more psychosocial support around the treatment than most people were getting from ketamine clinics at the time. So at the time, I saw that ketamine clinics were doing what I would call ketamine therapy 1.0, where it was really expensive, really hard to access in terms of finding a clinic and having someone drive you there and sitting with you and driving you back. Usually it was provided by someone who's not a mental health care provider, usually an ER doc or an anesthesiologist. And there was very little to no attention paid to people's mindsets going in, the actual physical setting and it being safe and comfortable for people, and any support around it to help people prepare for the experience, get the most out of that 45 to 1 hour session or flight time, and integrating the experience afterwards. And when I looked at it, I said, well, the mental health crisis is deeply personal and meaningful to me because I grew up in a family that was obliterated by the mental health crisis. My mother and my sister were both severely mentally ill. My mother and my sister were both schizophrenic and addicts. And for both of them, we tried all of the traditional treatment options to help them: antidepressants, anti anxiety meds, antipsychotics, talk therapy, group therapy, inpatient rehab facilities. And unfortunately, like for a lot of Americans, none of those options worked for them. So my mother ended up being homeless for 15 years before dying of a fentanyl overdose a couple of years ago. My sister died of a fentanyl overdose just last year. And so for both of them, they became this growing statistic of Americans who are dying from suicide or overdoses. Suicide and overdoses have become the top 2 leading causes of death for Americans under 45. That's how bad the problem has got. And my family, we grew up working class. My father, who's my hero and raised me and took care of our family, he was a mailman and then a city bus driver. And so when I started Mindbloom, I said, wow, I became a ketamine patient myself. It was super powerful. I've used a lot of different psychedelic medicines over the past 16 years, which have completely changed my life and who I am for myself and others. And I said, here's ketamine. It's here today. It's legally prescribable, has over 100 clinical studies run on it over the last 20 years, and a lot of providers increasingly providing it. But it's like $600 to $1,000 a session. Somebody has to drive you, and my family never would have been able to begin to afford that or be able to make that happen when my father was taking care of the family. In addition, there's so much opportunity to build a psychedelic therapy modality around ketamine, which I saw a lot of individual psychiatrists doing, but they're sort of less well known and was not the predominant way to do it. And so I thought we could both really help get this to a lot more people, like my family, really transform and ultimately save a lot of lives and help people get a lot more out of it.
The piece around your story, I'd heard that, researching the interview today, and it's obviously terrible and sorry to hear that you had to endure that. And I think part of this bigger crisis and issue that oftentimes is so prominent but goes unspoken or is kept silent both within the family and within broader society. And as you were saying, hey, we have potentially, it may not be a panacea, it may not be a magic bullet, but it is another option in this kind of tool belt of treatment options to address this crisis that's only getting worse. And still there's the stigma and the hesitancy and the kind of pushback around it. And so you kind of thinking through and making this evolution from the 1.0 model that certainly wasn't reaching nearly enough people to this new version, and I'm sure still encountering these barriers and pushback and resistance. How do you, or have you figured out how to kind of reconcile those two things? Like, we have something that is potentially, not potentially, is shown to work through clinical research, but there is still this perception and pushback. Like, how do we, Mindbloom, break through this barrier?
Just to double click into the situation and how I think it's obvious it is. Ketamine is clinically proven now to be like a 10x better solution to the number one treatment options for, say, depression. So SSRIs like Lexapro are prescribed to 40 million Americans. About a quarter of a million Americans have a diagnosable mental illness. And through surveys we've run, we've seen about 78% of Americans have experienced serious mental health challenges over the past year, and only about half are getting even thinking about getting treatment and talking about it and pursuing it. Um, and I think one of the big reasons is you look at the efficacy of SSRIs, and what you see is that they work for about 45% of people, which is not much higher than a placebo. They take 6 to 8 weeks to work. So if you're someone like my father who was suicidal after my sister died, and he ended up doing Mindbloom and ketamine therapy and achieved remission from his suicide and from his depression, 6 to 8 weeks might be too long to save a life. And three is they have a horrendous side effect profile, which stops a lot of people from trying and getting on it. 30 to 50% of people who take SSRIs have serious side effects: weight gain, sexual dysfunction, insomnia, sometimes suicidality or severe anxiety on top of it. Not to mention the sort of emotional blunting that you hear a lot of people talk about, where they just say, I'm not myself on these, I have to get off of them. Ketamine, on the other hand, is clinically shown to get people a clinically significant response rate 54% of the time when done in a clinic where you're just getting that injection and no psychosocial support. And we're getting people that clinically significant response rate 63% of the time. So that's like 40% more frequently than SSRIs. In addition, it works right away. So after just 1 to 2 sessions, as people are titrating up to the right therapeutic dose, they're achieving these outcomes. And three is people have side effects 10 times less frequently. And those, so we're talking less than 5% of people have side effects, and they're pretty light. They're like nausea, some grogginess, maybe some brain fog for the next couple of days. So you look at this medication, this treatment, that's like a 10x solution to arguably the number one public health crisis, the mental health crisis. And what you see is that this should become one of, if not really the predominant treatment option. However, it's probably still 0.2 to 0.3% of the psychiatric drug market today. And I think there are a couple of big barriers still. So one of the biggest ones, especially from the patient standpoint, that we've identified is fear. Uh, there's a stigma. It's new, it feels new, even if there has been 100 clinical studies published over the last 20 years and people providing it more and more frequently. It feels scary to people and it feels like a big step. So for a lot of patients, they consider ketamine therapy still a treatment of last resort, like electroshock therapy, when really it should be a treatment of first resort. Because it's actually, for a lot of people, quite pleasant to do, and they have a really positive experience. Not something that's very challenging. Although obviously there can be challenging experiences. And so to overcome this fear, in addition to doing things like publishing more and more clinical research and real world evidence, and we're actually running right now another study that's going to be an even largest ever clinical study in psychedelic therapy history. It's going to be close to like 8,000 patients from the 1,250 we did previously. Most studies are like 20, 30, 40, 50 patients that you see in ketamine therapy. We are also really focused on building what we call an evangelism engine. So one of the things we've identified is that one of the things that sort of gets people to trust and feel more comfortable and ready to try ketamine therapy and psychedelic therapy is hearing from somebody they trust like them that it's worked for them. And so from a big sort of pie in the sky conceptual goal, we'd like every single person in America to know that there's exactly somebody just like them dealing with the exact same problems as them, who's tried the exact same treatments as them and struggled or failed, who's done ketamine therapy, had a great experience, and achieved these transformational outcomes that they're hoping for. And so the best person you could hear from is a really close friend or family member who's done it, who you trust. Next best might be someone really influential who you trust: Tim Ferriss, Michael Pollan, Oprah. And then the next best from there is seeing somebody else, even if you don't know them, like a testimonial, who again looks just like you and had those experiences. I think there's another big barrier to adoption, though, which a lot of people don't talk about in the ketamine therapy or psychedelic therapy space enough. One of the things we also uncovered through a lot of research is that only 25% of the behavioral healthcare market will consider a treatment they learn about direct to consumer, like through Instagram or Facebook ads or Google ads, which is the way that we predominantly reach customers today or patients today. 75% will only do it if they hear about it from a medical provider. And so one of the things that we began doing recently is we had a lot of psychiatrists and psychiatric nurse practitioners asking about how we could help them add ketamine therapy onto their practice, because they see this as the future of mental health care, especially with other medicines like MDMA and psilocybin-assisted therapy coming down the pipeline over the next few years. And so Mindbloom, we've begun partnering with other medical providers in a way that looks a little bit more like pharma sales or medical device sales, but very sort of unique and bespoke in terms of how we do it, because it's a whole new sort of construct, psychedelic therapy, to enable those providers to add on Mindbloom's ketamine therapy protocol to their practice. We're there, the prescriber, and then we're wrapping around them with the medication fulfillment, the mobile app, our coaches, our patient community, et cetera.
Yeah, I think that last piece is really interesting as well. Essentially making it turnkey for them to operationalize this and prescribe it and deliver it in a way that even if they could and they can prescribe the medication, they're not having the other pieces. I think the app experience, the content, when you do the sessions, sometimes it's like guided in terms of a speech or like almost like a presentation audio. And there's also music that goes along with it, and then journaling and all these other aspects that really for an individual clinician or even a practice to build is almost impossible, I'd imagine. So being able to say, hey, here's this turnkey solution. What you said you're beginning to do that, and it's in terms of the being receptive among patients, like they're far more likely to do it when they are hearing it from a healthcare professional. Is that even a percentage of the business at this point that you could point to and say it's X amount, or it's growing, or is it's still nascent in terms of getting that stood up and getting other kind of clinicians to partner with you on that?
Yeah, it's nascent. I mean, we launched essentially our direct to consumer business to patients in around March of 2019. We just began piloting this sort of B2B to C model versus like a B2C model earlier this year. but it's been growing really quickly. That's one of those things that like the market has pulled it out of us by providers coming to us and asking for it. But I think it's going to take still a long time. Providers are not the generally like early adopters. My last company is my third funded company. My last company was in both the legal, tech, and financial services space. Raised several $100 million of the company. It's a market leader in space still. It's called Mighty. And one of the verticals I opened up as co-founder and head of growth there was the medical vertical. And so selling into doctors who are extremely busy and focused on their patients and their practice, selling them new solutions can be quite challenging. So right now, we've built up a core group of like anchor partners who we're building the entire product and program around, because it's not just like launching a new channel, like launching YouTube ads when you're doing Facebook ads. It's a whole product market fit exercise of understanding what their unique needs are, how to build for them, enable them to add it to the practice, and then enable a good utilization rate for them to send clients through.
Hey everyone, we'll get back to the show in just a second. But first, I wanted to tell you about our exclusive PR partner, Jack Taylor. Honestly, this one's a no-brainer. We've known the Jack Taylor team for years. They work with some of the most innovative health and wellness companies. We're talking Whoop, Athletic Greens, Hyperice, and many more. Jack Taylor has an extensive industry network, knows how to work with high-growth companies, and really invests in building long-term relationships. I know this firsthand because they're Fitt Insider's PR agency, so I can confidently recommend them, and I do all the time. From startups to more established brands, they go beyond pushing product to help companies truly thrive. To learn more, head to fit.co/Jack Taylor. That's FITT.co/Jack Taylor. Now back to the show. Yeah, huge potential there. It sounds like in, operationalizing and getting the right product market fit within that channel is just kind of another lever to pull as you continue to expand the business down the path of this kind of direct to consumer. Right now, it is a matter of, I think I've heard the ads for Mindbloom maybe on a podcast or a couple podcasts now. Obviously, there's like the social media channels. There's all the different kind of avenues that you would think of when it comes to a direct to consumer model. How are you able to navigate that? Are there regulatory barriers? Is there kind of concern over, you see this sometimes right now. It's actually happening quite a bit with something like Ozempic, right? Like weight loss prescriptions or digital health. It's like, where is the line in terms of marketing something that could be hugely helpful for somebody or kind of pushing too far something that's supposed to be kind of in a clinical setting? How do you think about that kind of marketing lever?
I think a couple directions to go in. One is at a very high level. When I started Mindbloom, I thought I had a unique superpower in that my last business operated with a lot of regulatory considerations. Regulatory is a core competency. We raised a several $100 million credit fund, essentially a hedge fund within the business to finance our customers. So we dealt with the SEC, the CFPB. We had healthcare as part of our platform, so things like HIPAA. But building more of a pure mental health company, especially in psychedelic medicine, especially in telemedicine, psychedelic medicine, has been a whole different ballgame when it comes to the regulatory bar. But one of the things that's been really surprising is when I started the company, Congress and Trump at the time had signed legislation that was going to push the DEA to create this special registration for the prescribing of controlled substances like ketamine therapy through telemedicine, specifically focused on behavioral health. And so at that time, I knew as a matter of when, not if, we would be able to provide ketamine therapy remotely. Silver lining of COVID was that we'd already treated several hundred patients in a clinic with them continuing treatment remotely and then accelerate our remote timeline. But one of the things that surprised me is how bipartisan and sort of universal the support for psychedelic medicine has been in the government. Just earlier this year, we went out and spoke to close to 100 senators, Congress people, members of the administration, as they were figuring out the end of the public health emergency and what that would look like, to ensure that they understood that it was critical for providers to continue to be able to prescribe safe and efficacious medicines like ketamine therapy through telemedicine. We have a huge access issue in mental health. Something like 160 million Americans are outside of behavioral health coverage zones as it is. not to mention the high cost of behavioral healthcare services, not to mention the sort of efficacy crisis that we have in mental health that we talked about. And essentially, it was met with universal support. So the Biden administration recently wrote a letter saying that they were unequivocally supporting and prioritizing the acceleration of MDMA therapy and psilocybin therapy for behavioral health, specifically for veterans. And that has definitely been a pleasant surprise. And I think it actually makes a lot of sense because since starting Mindbloom, I have not met a single individual who does not have a 1 degree separation from someone very close to them with a serious mental health issue. Personal, close family member, or friend, close colleague. People are seeing the mental health crisis face first, and they see that it's getting worse and worse with things like, as I mentioned, overdose deaths and suicide skyrocketing. So I think for those reasons, we have felt like we've had largely regulatory tailwinds where we've been skating to where the puck is going, and the puck got there. That said, it's incredibly complex building for uh, regulatory bar as high as psychedelic therapy, telemedicine. And one of the increasing challenges has been uh, the government's stance on like privacy and marketing in general. On my regulatory bingo card when I started the company, if you had said that some of the biggest challenges we were going to be facing was just about how we advertise on Facebook, as the government has gotten a lot more critical about how Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook and Meta are allowing advertising. That one is not on my list of like top 50 regulatory considerations, and is actually the one that eats up most of our time here in terms of like shifting landscape, things changing. So that has been a challenge. But it also makes sense. Like America is one of the only countries that allows the advertising of drugs or medical services directly to patients. And so it makes sense that we'd be thinking a lot about intelligent, thoughtful ways to do that that keeps patients' best interests in mind.
Yeah, it's necessary, it's kind of vital, and it's also delicate. And then there's also the regulatory that adds another layer of complexity with that in terms of marketing and reaching this 300,000 plus sessions. You mentioned earlier kind of the best way or the ideal ways that people are finding out about Mindbloom would be somebody close to them, right? A referral, word of mouth, and then also clinicians making that referral also, or directing them in that direction. How do you kind of build this growth or marketing around that? What channels do you see working? Where are you able to kind of pull these levers in a way that you are growing the business despite challenges there might be through those channels? Are you able to point to like one or three that's like, oh, this is working, this isn't working, and maybe here's why?
So in addition to some of our just core performance marketing channels like Meta and Google, um, one of the things that we have seen that's, I think, unique to our business is this ability to build an evangelism engine. Um, so, as I mentioned, we've uncovered that one of literally the number one thing people are considering before making a buying decision for Mindbloom is testimonials, is hearing about it from other people, reading testimonials from people like them, really understanding those client stories to see like, can this work for somebody like me dealing with the issues I'm having? Another element is that if you talk about people who've had a psychedelic experience, you usually hear that the NPS score is pretty high. People who have psychedelic experiences, ketamine or maybe it's MDMA or psilocybin, especially when they do it in an intelligent way or in a facilitated way where they're really paying attention to preparing well, high quality medication or product, working with a facilitator, integrating well, the NPS score is off the charts. And so we have a lot of clients who they say this transformed their life and they want to tell everybody about it. Like, how can I help this entire movement and cause? Because I struggled for 5, 10, 20, 30 years. Our average client's 41, and we have more clients with the age of 57 in their 20s. How can I let other people know? People need to know. um, and so we have been helping to sort of support and really arm our evangelists with the tools and mechanisms to go out there and share their experiences. So, for instance, when we were meeting with members of Congress at the end of the public health emergency, we send out one email, and then we have several hundred letters that got written to members of Congress from our patient community. Um, we have an online patient community on Facebook that is growing extremely quickly, where people are extremely engaged. And not only they're sharing about their stories, but they're inviting other people who are interested in learning about ketamine therapy into the community so that they can tell them about their experiences, so that prospects or interested prospective patients aren't just hearing about it from Mindbloom, the marketing engine and team, but from actual real life patients who've experienced the product themselves. A lot of those patients are also going on social media. They're recording YouTube videos of their experience and taking people through it. They're going on Reddit and posting about their experiences. And so building up this evangelism engine to help people know how to share it effectively and give them the tools to has been something that's been really exciting, and we've seen drive a lot of benefits.
Yeah, it's powerful to see that firsthand.
Another big thing we're doing, one of our sort of key strategic priorities right now, is moving Mindbloom to something that looks a little bit more multi-product. And so it's called, I named it Mindbloom, not Ketabloom, or even psychedelic bloom, for a reason. At-home sublingual ketamine therapy for people with anxiety and depression has just been like our first product with our first two customer segments. And so right now we're expanding the platform into like a larger mental health platform, starting by having an entire library of programs and pathways for ketamine therapy. Because ketamine is not just effective for anxiety and depression, it can be effective for a lot of different mental health care issues and even just challenges people have. Mental health is really dynamic. People deal with different things at different times in their lives. And a neuroplastic drug like ketamine can help people rewire their brain in a lot of ways that can help them with these issues. So we have built and are continuing to build out programs for things like grief, OCD, PTSD, alcohol use disorder, eating disorder, couples therapy, you name it. We have a sort of a backlog of like 25 to 30 that we're building. And one of the things we're doing is we're actually partnering with leading experts in behavioral health, doctors and credible medical experts who are leaders in their field, who've written books on topics, like grief or eating disorder, to come in and build, one of the first, and will immediately be the largest psychedelic therapy program, for their specialty. And then we're going to be putting them on, media tours, going out and talking about how psychedelic therapy is really effective for those mental health issues.
Yeah, it's super interesting. I think the use cases, the applications, the modal, like all of these things, the content that then comes with the pathways, and that goes back to the point that you mentioned around people needing to feel like, oh, this is for me or someone like me, and not just broadly mental health or anxiety or depression, which sometimes can be scary and kind of nebulous. And what does this mean? And how does this apply not only to me, but like maybe ketamine therapy or any potential treatment? I think when you talk about the mind bloom piece, and not Ketabloom or just psychedelics, the maybe a couple more questions before we get you out of here, but this one was kind of top of mind for me. Building this essentially platform that whatever different therapy, drug, molecule, you name it, becomes legal, you insert it into this platform in the same way that you're doing with the content and the pathways and the different kind of treatment applications. Is that the long-term plan? Is it just a matter of legalization and the kind of research proving the different drugs applicable for the mental health crisis and each kind of category, subcategory within it? How do you think about then continuing to expand the treatment and the drugs that are delivered?
The way I think about it is that we have this massive mental health crisis that's getting worse every day, and our not only do people not have access to treatment, but our legacy treatment options are not getting the job done. And so Mindbloom exists with this big mission to transform lives, to transform the world. It's to help individuals become happier, healthier, more resilient versions of themselves, both for them, but also for the ripple effect that that will have on how they show up for their family, their community, and the work that they can do in the world. I saw that with my family, how destructive and, sort of deleterious my mother's mental health issues had on our family unit, on me personally. And I saw how once I really began a path of personal transformation of my mental health and how I related and treated others, that had a ripple effect out in a positive way to the people around me and the work I did in the world. And so the way that we're doing that is by increasing access and building products and services and applications to help people get the most out of the most efficacious treatments available. And so today that's ketamine therapy. Starting late next year, we're going to be adding on MDMA assisted therapy and psilocybin assisted therapy or magic mushrooms, probably a year or two after that. But even in the interim, we think there's a lot of opportunity to add on other clinical products and services where people will be able to get more out of them because they're being paired with ketamine therapy. So, for instance, one of the ones that we're looking at and building towards right now is helping people titrate off of antidepressants. So 40 million Americans are on antidepressants. A lot of people come into Mindbloom, they do ketamine therapy, and now they want to titrate off of those antidepressants, which you can't really quit cold turkey. And right now, we're just sending them on their way. Good luck. So we see an opportunity to sort of take people on a longer care journey, whether or not they're just doing ketamine or other behavioral health programs and services, and help them get even better outcomes because they have this neuroplastic drug and experience as part of their overall care journey.
There's obviously, quite a few different drugs that are expected to become legal, and then the applications for that, and then even the care pathways that you mentioned, all kind of expanding this platform and helping you achieve this mission, essentially to help people live their best lives, be their happiest, healthiest self. And with the mental health crisis continuing to worsen, that's more and more and more people, a growing percentage of the population. There's also this other side, and I've talked to quite a few people in the psychedelic space, ketamine, psilocybin, MDMA, you name it, who come to it. Obviously, for something like Mindbloom, you have to be prescribed, you have to get a diagnosis, there has to be some type of clinical application. Then there's folks who say, like, it should just all be legal. Everybody is an adult. They can choose to pursue it if they want to live their happiest, healthiest lives. Maybe they don't have a clinical diagnosis they could point to get access to these medicines. Like, should they not just have access to them? How do you think about that? Just like legalization and, let things play out like alcohol or tobacco or any kind of substance that we already have access to.
I think one of the things that surprises people is, there's Dylan, the CEO of Mindbloom's viewpoint, and there's Dylan, the individual's viewpoint. And so my viewpoint is it's my body, my choice. And I think there are some questions around things that are truly addictive being so dangerous that maybe, we want it to be illegal, right? Like, makes sense that people can't on the street just go around and buy like a heat-seeking missile or some other, or claymore mines. But there's some level of self-defense technology that, is reasonable for people to own on their own. Like, there's some level of danger level that maybe society would say is a problem. And to me, there's something that's truly addictive that can hijack people's brains. Maybe something like fentanyl or heroin should remain illegal. But you do see that psychedelic medicines, while a lot safer than other substances that people imbibe, there definitely is a risk when it's not done well. And so you look at like a drug safety analysis, a drug harm scale. So they do these studies, and they look at the harm to yourself when you use something and the harm to others. So those are the two dimensions. And so alcohol is actually the most harmful drug that exists. Something like a third of all motor vehicle accidents or motor vehicle fatalities, alcohol is like a leading cause of them, or a big input into them. Obviously, there's a lot of things like domestic violence and street violence with alcohol, and it's incredibly toxic to people's bodies and incredibly addictive. Psychedelics, ketamine, MDMA, psilocybin, are like a fraction on the drug harm scale against something like alcohol. So if you look at that, you say, okay, well, it doesn't make sense that something like alcohol would be not just legal, but like kind of socially encouraged everywhere you go, whereas these are illegal substances. In ketamine's case, it's Schedule 3 controlled substance, so legal for medical use. The other one's completely legal, soon about to change, fortunately. But you do see that these medicines, when not done properly, can have meaningful risks. So if somebody comes in who has a contraindicated health condition like pregnancy, that can be a huge risk. And a lot of people don't know that potentially, right? If somebody comes in with a heart issue, they could not be eligible for treatment. And so, you can put yourself at risk if you have, pre-existing heart issue and you're using these substances unknowingly, not under medical supervision. If somebody has active psychosis or, a track record or deep family history of psychosis, it can really exacerbate or worsen that, cause an episode. And for some people, if they're not being cared for by medical providers, someone won't catch that in time and be able to intervene. Furthermore, as we talked about, like what you do before, during, and after the experience dramatically affects the safety of the experience, the quality, and the outcomes from the experience. And so by working with medical providers, trained facilitators, really great patient education, it's much safer, much better experience, and much better outcomes. So I think it's a multifaceted question, and I have my, or my business view, my Mindbloom, the CEO viewpoint, my personal viewpoint. But clearly, the policy that we have today in the United States of America around drug laws is completely bonkers and broken. And I never thought I would really see that fixed in my lifetime, even though it was one of the things I wanted to most see fixed, given how important psychedelics were for me personally and a lot of people in my life. And so to say that seeing us about to be pushing on the right side of history is exciting is a gross understatement.
Yeah, I think all those things lining up from your personal experience, using psychedelics, the impact the mental health crisis had on your family, the work you've done, in the startup space, and now choosing to tackle something like this and dedicate that time and effort to it. It's powerful to see all those things kind of come together. And I'm grateful for you making the time today to kind of share that with listeners, and obviously the work that you're doing. For folks that are interested in learning more, where would you point them?
Yeah, I just want to say that I often think about how if we're going to invert this mental health crisis curve and start winning, and we're going to do it by getting psychedelic medicine and other efficacious treatments out there, we need people to have the courage to speak up and break the stigma and say, I've tried ketamine or psychedelic therapy and it really worked for me. I probably would not have started Mindbloom if it wasn't for Tim Ferriss specifically, who I used to listen to his podcast all the time, really talking about it and saying, well, if he'll put his name on it, speak publicly, maybe I can have the courage to speak publicly about it and build a company around it myself. And so I want to acknowledge that you having the courage to on your podcast talk about doing Mindbloom and ketamine therapy, because I think that's one of the ways that we're going to really, propel this into the mainstream like it should be when you look at these outcomes. I don't have social media myself as part of my mental health care practice, but I do post on LinkedIn frequently about company culture, psychedelic movement, behavioral health crisis, and sort of building my business in public. So you can find me on LinkedIn under my name, Dylan Beynon. And for Mindbloom, we're at Mindbloom or at Mindbloom on all socials.
Yeah, we'll get it. We'll get it all the links. Make sure people know where to go. And yeah, again, thanks for spending some time today. I really appreciate the conversation.
Likewise, Joe. This was a blast. Thanks for having me on.
One more thing before you head out. Help us spread the word. Take a minute to rate and review the podcast, subscribe to the YouTube channel, or share this episode with a friend. And if you like conversations like this, you'll love the Fitt Insider newsletter. We send it every Tuesday. The link is in the description. Thanks again for listening. We'll see you back here next week.